Hey everybody, it is Matt Weaver here with Roy Troyer with another scandalous, is that the right word? Scandalous topic to discuss. This one's going to be this one could get us banned for good. Um, Roy picked this subject and it is the patriarchy versus feminism. Ah, dare we? This is scary.
Dare we
Well,
tread where few men have trodden?
Well, this will be fun. So yeah, I guess what were your thoughts behind this?
Well, I mean, it's a subject that needs to be talked about, basically. Um,
Are
you
you
know,
declaring at the outset that you are a male chauvinist pig?
just put a flag on my head.
Okay.
No, I mean, I guess if that's what somebody wants to label me, then I guess that's their prerogative, of course. But
Well, what is your position?
well, um, so I guess I'll give a little background where I come from, since it's relevant to the subject. So, we've mentioned on this podcast, I would have grown up Amish, and having grown up that way, it's a subset of society that's very patriarchal. And growing up that way, it never really occurred to me that there's another way of structuring family life or even gender roles or whatever. Um, And then by the time I was a little bit older, getting out into the world a little more, making certain comments that I thought were perhaps common sense started getting me into trouble. And so I picked up that there's obviously a different view of gender roles that's out there that's very prevalent just immediately outside of the Amish world. And had me a little puzzled for a while. And, I kind of maybe you could say conformed for a while and just chose my words a little wisely, which I still do, of course. Try to be wise with and discreet with the things I say. But at some point, I came to the conclusion that, it's the off limits conversations that are probably the ones that need to be had because there are, shall we say, perhaps certain spirits surrounding those things that are trying to protect a certain agenda, is the way I would view it, I guess. So yeah, I think that no conversations, as long as, they're relevant to all of society, as this one is, should be off limits. So let's dive in.
Dive
What are
in.
your, I mean,
Well,
your background would be similar, right? I mean,
I wasn't, I didn't grow up Amish. My parents left before I was born, so there is a little bit of a difference. But yeah, so essentially in the church world, as I understand it, in general, of course, there's a secular view, and we're not necessarily dealing with the secular side of it. But for those of us who are believers, that's really where we're at. There's two positions that generally are out there. One is the egalitarian view, and one is the complementarian view. And the basic difference between the two is the egalitarian that there's, they view it as equal. Both can really do the same.
right,
Um, and complementarian is that each one has its own gifts, but they complement each other. And look, I know people maybe where the situation is both and. As far as in one how would you say this? As one couple might be more egalitarian, the other couple might be more complementarian. Um, but if, and there's pros and cons to probably all of it, right? So, but if we go back to the earliest point in history, without question, Not even in a religious sense, but for most of human history, patriarchy has been the status quo. That is how the world has gone forward. That's how civilization survived,
Right.
was with a men-led world. The people that would champion that tend to say, that men are stronger and better able to lead and leaders and things of that nature. The detractors would say that look at all the wars and bloodshed and things are that were fought because men can't control themselves. Um, on the flip side, look, my personal position is that if you look at the garden, for instance, God created men and women to serve a unique role within what is called humanity. If you look at Adam originally, Adam was one being. He was seemingly male and female in one entity because God took Eve out of him.
Mm,
Um, now, what that looked like, I don't know, but it does kind of indicate that he went through all the animals and saw they all had partners and he had none, and then God caused a deep sleep to come over him, and then he took Eve out of him, and now he had a well-matched helper. He also had this thing. So I guess the first thing we look at is in the animal world, and we see that the is it safe to use gender in the animal world? But you see that the male female dynamic is alive and well in the animal world, and oftentimes in a complementary fashion.
right.
Uh, one the male being perhaps in some animals more the killer, the hunter, the gatherer, if you will, and the female more the nurturer. However, there are many species where that's not the case. The lions, for instance, the men just fight, the males just fight, and the women do all the breadwinning, basically.
Yeah.
Um,
You have your anomalies in nature and in humans.
yeah, I mean, so in short, it's complex. It's complex. The pattern, I guess, in the early texts of the Bible, like I had mentioned, was patriarchal, and that was the way the ancient world worked. In the modern world, it doesn't work quite like that. Most families today would probably view it a bit more egalitarian. If they are married, if they're going to join up like that, there's going to be more of a split of tasks and things that are going to be taken care of. And look, it comes back to the ultimate question: what is the most biblical way? And I don't know that I have like tremendous thought from a biblical standpoint. I know the pattern was patriarchal. Is that the most God honoring scenario? Well, it all depends how you interpret that first part of Genesis when God, um, after the fall, when God has this declaration that causes all the controversy today,
Yeah.
and basically at that point tells the woman your desire will be to your husband, and he will, is it, let me just quote it so I don't get it
Rule
wrong.
over you. Yeah.
Rule over you, depending on your translation. Rule over you.
Yeah. But there are many subsequent scriptures too that indicate a more patriarchal view that I guess God would have on humanity.
Let me see here. Um, Genesis 3, I'm just getting down to it here. Which version should we use and read from?
I don't know. I think the some of them say like your desire will be against your husband and he will rule over you, and then some say your desire will be for your husband. I'm not sure how those two opposites
Okay.
get translated differently like that, but
Here's the Net Bible. Here's this is a good one. To the woman he said, I will greatly increase your labor pains, and with pain you will give birth to children, and you will want to control your husband, but he will dominate you. Cringeworthy
uh,
scriptures. But to Adam he said, because you obeyed your wife and ate from the tree which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. The ground is cursed because of you. In painful toil you will eat of it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles, but you will eat the grain of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat food until you return to the ground, for out of it you were taken, for you are dust, and the dust you will return. Um, so anyway, there you go. That's the net. Let's just go some other translations here just for the sake of brevity. Um, we go to ESV. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you.
Right.
Um, King James, the King Jimmy, and thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. Well, that doesn't really.
Right. That's what I mean. Some of them give you a completely different perspective of what they're trying to say.
ASV is thy husband. JPS, this is the Jewish publication. Let's see what they have. And thy desire shall be to thy husband. What are the words we're looking at here? Thy desire, teshachah. Yeah, so it seems this ale is the one
The
to
what?
be against, near, to fight. That's where the controversy is this Hebrew word ale, el.
Oh, so that, yeah, obviously can be
It can
translated multiple different ways.
right because it can be about, according to, after, against, among. So depending how you interpret that, it can be like for or to or against.
Hmm.
And that's probably why there's a lot of different views.
Right. And
Um,
then the question comes into play too. Like some people would say, well, the curse is gone. And, to some degree, we have,
if that's the case, we'll live forever in our bodies.
right. Yeah. I mean, there's a case to be made that certain curses we can be free from because of, the work of the cross, Jesus becoming a curse for us. And yet, yeah, like you mentioned, we're still dying and men are still having to work and women are still having child pains or birth pains when they're having children. So I'm not sure that all of the curses in the garden are taken care of until the return of Jesus.
Well, it depends how
Um,
you define pain.
well, anything that hurts is pain, Matthew.
Not necessarily. It depends how you interpret.
Um, but yeah, I mean, to your point, what you were saying about men in the past being the leaders charging ahead and, all the wars and this and that, it seems a little bit like up until, the feminist movement started, life was kind of rough and it still was even at that point. But it was reaching a point where the last frontiers had kind of been conquered. Um, Life was a little easier, inventions were coming on the scene, and it just kind of seemed like women felt like they don't really need that kind of protector, or they don't need that kind of dependence on a protector in their lives anymore because of where we were as a civilization. Um, but, I would make the point that men are useful for more than physical security, if you want to put it that way. It seems like God has established the calling of men to be gatekeepers to a certain degree. And, if you take men away from that role, you're bringing things in that are not necessarily good. And you brought the point out about, all the bloodshed and wars and this and that men engaged in. Sure, yeah, that's a relevant point. But as our society becomes increasingly feminine, you have these things come in more of a backdoor way, say in the form of, abortion. It's not as in your face, and it kind of seems like maybe out of sight, out of mind is more the philosophy of a more feminine run world than a man run world. And as far as the gatekeeper point that I'm trying to make, you know, going back to the garden, First Timothy 2:14 brings out the point that Adam was actually not deceived, but Eve was. And yet you see that Adam was held accountable for the fall, for the sin. Um, so I would say that perhaps in general, women might be more susceptible to deception according to scripture, and men might have a rebellion problem. Um, but if God can bring men to subjection, then he relies on them to have the discernment to be gatekeepers and watchers over their homes, over their communities, and over their nations. And, even Isaiah 3:12 brings out the fact that having female rulers is a form of judgment from God. Whatever you want to make of that, you know. So those are some of my preliminary thoughts. Um, Something else that struck me was, I had brought out the first wave feminism was came around, right around the time when things were starting to get a little bit easier and women might not need men quite as much. Um, and as I was thinking about this subject over the past couple of weeks, I was thinking, it's kind of interesting that the rise of feminism coincided quite a bit with the rise of communism in the world. And for some reason, the thought struck me, and I was like, well, I'm going to look into it a little bit. And it's actually pretty striking how similar the timeline is, even so much so that in 1848 is actually when, on a national level, with the Seneca Falls Convention, um, the first, I guess, official national movement for feminism would have started. And then the same year, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels would have released their Communist Manifesto. So I found that interesting. And also, then communism would have been cemented with the communist revolution in Russia in 1917. And depending on which country you're looking at, I know that, like in New Zealand, they would have had their suffrage or their fulfillment of their suffrage in the late 1800s, like the 1890s. We would have had ours in 1920, where, and it kind of follows similar timelines there. And it just kind of struck me, and I figured I'd just kind of go out on a limb a little bit. Never heard anybody pose this before, but perhaps there's a bit of a zeitgeist going on here of, obviously the enemy has different access to different nations in different ways. Um, and it just seemed like maybe this was a seed that was planted in the West, feminism, I mean, versus communism in other countries. And I guess what do I mean by that? I would say that both movements were rebelling against the established order of things on different levels and in different fields. And, like you said, the patriarchy, what people might call the patriarchy, was, in play and in place for thousands of years. We're talking about two different movements that are rebelling against the established order of things that have been in place for thousands of years. Of course, you have anomalies. You have indigenous tribes that have matriarchal societies. You have, um, even apart from that, you have different places where, and even in the West, where you had people where there might have been small smatterings of what you might call feminism, but nothing ever took a hold and took root the way this did. And so, yeah, we're talking about thousands of years of norms being uprooted and upended. And ultimately reducing, or it seems like both movements ultimately are reducing all people or attempting to reduce all people to an indistinguishable blob of sameness, which brings you back to the egalitarian versus complementarian argument. The communists were along class, economic, and achievement lines, and feminists along gender lines. And you didn't see it really in the feminist movement right away. I don't think, you might argue that first wave feminism really was fairly innocuous and that not much happened because of that upended, social norms. But when we see what was built on that, um, I think we see the result of that just the same. So I'll let you
Yeah, I mean, I,
comment.
I'm a bit conflicted in general because if at the end of the day, there's chaos regardless of the society. Like if you look at societies today where it's very male dominant and patriarchal, if you will, you have the majority of Africa, you have the Muslim world for sure. Um, when I say the Muslim world, for sure the practicing Muslims, maybe not the cultural ones, but in general, there is this um patriarchal kind of view. And what you often get with those systems is, and a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are okay with things like polygamy,
Yeah,
things of that nature. And that in itself is a very difficult and controversial subject because of the nature of what you're doing. I just saw a meme the other day. I was shocked. I mean, it was not a meme. It was a short of a Muslim lady saying that, oh, like if you are a good wife, you'll be finding another wife for your husband. It's like, what? Like, what is that?
yeah,
Um, so patriarchy has its limits. There is an
sure.
edge to it that isn't good, that has caused I don't know, well I don't know how to go as far as abuse in its just normal state, but certainly at times can be abusive, certainly at times can be controlling and manipulative. um but yes, there is a security in the patriarchal system because you have a patriarch who takes care of the family. um but I guess the biblical view, I like in a lot of ways, like even Orthodox Judaism, women have a very important part to play in their life. They're definitely complementarians. And just for clarity's sake, I land on the complementarian part. I mean, my wife has skills and abilities that I don't have. And I also have skills and abilities that she doesn't have. And we complement each other. Basically, the both of us make the household work. If it was just relying on me and my paternal instincts, um, we would not be a home. We would be a man cave or something like that. We require each other's gifts to make a family unit work. So I, the reason I'm complementarian is because I believe that generally there are those gaps that are filled by each gender.
Yeah,
Um, and so I'm on that side of the fence, but I do understand women are more capable oftentimes of doing things than a traditional patriarchal worldview would have allowed. There, for instance, in
sure.
warfare or in any manufacturings or in any kind of means of production and services, women were relegated to what men would consider weak positions. And what we've found at least in our modern day, is that women often do make good, um, can be executives, can be accounting, there's all kinds of jobs that women are great at and sometimes better than men. Whether it's healthcare services, there are definitely jobs where women are in the minority. There's many male dominant positions. I mean, that could be, um, yeah, military is a good example. Um,
But the question comes into play
Mechanics.
then about childcare too. Is it better for society for women to be doing those things while they have children, or the
Yeah.
it,
Well, I mean, it's even our background people, even in the Amish, um, those groups, the women are starting to, I mean, not generally when they have kids, but it's
right.
not rare for women to have jobs.
Yeah, and
There was a
the things
there
you're
was a
bringing
time
out are
even in our
definitely
lifetimes where that was like unthought of. Like to hear a woman having a job was like that man must be lazy. You know,
right.
as we would say, us father. So he must schaffen because us father. She has to work because he's lazy. That's maybe some of the stigma that would have come out in those days. So there's a little PA
Yeah.
German for you. Listen, we're both fluent in this German dialect called Pennsylvania Dutch. It's not Dutch, it's a German. It's just comes
Right.
from Deutsch. But anyway, we speak it. Yay.
Yep.
um, but in short, yeah, I mean, I understand like the idea that we go back to the America where women couldn't even vote is kind of like those changes probably had to take place. Like my wife is fully capable of making a decision who she votes for. And as a society, we're wealthier now than we were then. However, I understand the social ills of the day are real. Um, so in short, I don't know what system is best per se. I think from my biblical point of view, I think it makes sense that there's complementarian. You know, I think if a wife can be at home, that's wonderful. If she can be at home to raise the kids and he's the breadwinner, that's wonderful. There are cases in our modern world where it's not really set up like that, and you will not be able to make that happen depending where you're at. Um, so yeah, I I'm probably not as strong on this subject as what you are. So I'll turn the mic over to you and you preach to us.
No, I'm not trying to provide a sermon. I'm trying to have a conversation about a difficult topic here.
Well, it's
But
difficult
no,
because you don't want to hurt feelings. You know, at the end of the day, it's not about hurting feelings. It's just, we have a lot of women employees, we have a lot of men employees. They are all suited to different tasks, to different things. Um, in my experience, women oftentimes, depending on what you're doing, can be better employees. Um, if you're if you like one of the businesses we deal with is a coffee shop, women are definitely better in a coffee shop setting than men.
yeah,
Men's minds tend to wander, and women are more focused. And that's not a dynamic that's just there. There are people. I have an uncle who owns a chair business, manufactures chair. They have better success with women than they do with men because women, again, they're more focused and they don't have the daydreams going on. So
assembly
production tends to
line type
be here.
of, yeah, sure.
Yeah. Men tend to dream of everything they could be doing except the thing that they're doing at the time. So,
Yeah,
there's definitely ability there that we can't ignore. But from a family unit standpoint, the nuclear family, I think, is a positive thing. I think it raises the best kids. It's even in nature, you need male and female involved in the offspring's life in order to really form them into a being a good of whatever they are. You know what I mean?
right,
If you isolate an animal from its parents, it's suffering. It's not doing well. And I think the
right.
same is true in human. That's just from a secular standpoint. From a biblical perspective, there's no question that a child needs a mother and a father to be part of their life, and that any disruption of that unit is destructive to the child. It's a very unfortunate situation, and
Yeah.
it's why there is a special heart um, for those who are orphaned, um, cast out, because they deal with a different set of challenges because of the nature of being in the situation they are. And of course, accidents happen, but if they're rejected and given away, that can cause a tremendous amount of suffering in children. And today, I would say in society as a whole, the downfall of the nuclear family really centered around entitlement, like is when entitlements came to be, when it was like the family isn't necessary, that you can do this on your own. When that mentality was introduced and that the state will become the father figure in your life and we will give you food stamps and all that stuff, we without question I would say the left, now we go political. The left views the government far more as a parent figure, as a patriarch,
Right.
than the right. The right tends to look at the government as more of a umpire.
Necessary evil.
Well, as an umpire to keep the game fair for everybody.
Yeah.
And I would say that especially on the socialist and communist, like you mentioned, side of the spectrum, they view the government as a father, patriarch. You know, you look to dad to supply all your goods and needs. And so I think in that sense, it's actually anti um really women's rights per se, because it's again, it's this paternal kind of thing.
Well, yeah, you end up coming full circle basically, and nature, if you want to call it nature, corrects itself with there being a paternal figure in place through in the form of government. But, bringing the nuclear family into the picture, I would say that is one of the biggest problems in our society right now is the breakdown of the family. And I would say that normalizing divorce is largely because of feminism. And like you said, you can bring in some good aspects of what feminism has brought. But if you look at the big picture, I think that we've brought in things through feminism more so. The other side of it, you bring in the biggest argument for feminism is against the patriarchy, which is supposedly so, oppressive and so on. But I think the biggest oppression that they were arguing against was their dependence on men. The thing is, back before feminism took full root in our society, there was a thing called chivalry, which hardly exists anymore. And uh, I think that there's something to be said for, men realizing that there's a difference between men and women and realizing that women are the weaker vessel and to treat them as such with chivalry. And also, men having this drive to provide and have, men having a woman dependent on them does not create division. It creates cohesion, and men actually thrive on that. They want to supply for their family, they want to supply for their children, their wife, the whole nine yards. And I think where the disruption of the nuclear family comes in is where you have women who all of a sudden have very high paying jobs and they don't have the same drive that men do to supply for their family. You know, it's not hardwired into women to be the breadwinner. And I think that the divorce rate has definitely increased as women were able to have their own sustenance and then perhaps get out when things get a little rough. Um, and, of course, you have abortion coming into the picture too, that feminists would claim as one of their sacraments. And talking about oppression too, I would say there's probably a lot more domestic abuse at this point than there was before feminism got a hold of society. And the reason for that is basically because men have believed women and feminists that they are fully equal in every way to men. Um, so you have men that think that women are their equal, and so you basically don't have this respect anymore that men used to have in a chivalrous way for women. And now you have all kinds of violence and domestic abuse and things like that that come into play that were not necessarily the norm before feminism came on the scene. You had honor code, you had even so much as duels being fought over women's honor before, the feminist movement. So I think by and large, there's a lot that was lost through feminism that we would do well to regain as a society. Let's just put it that way.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons. There were things done in those systems, which we grew up in those systems, and there are things that happen in those systems that are negative,
Yeah. And
and
the thing with our society is we would have had all the patriarchy and none of the chivalry, basically. You know. So
us
we
men
did,
to do. What do you
you
mean?
know,
Yeah, I mean, yes, yes. In short, like the whole in classical culture, I guess you would say gentleman, who would be that way. And there's something to be said for that society. At the end of the day, what I look at is in the garden, for instance, before the fall, that dynamic was a little different. It wasn't until after the fall that you have this entered in that your desire will be either to be with, towards your husband or against, depending how you interpret it, but that there's going to
right,
be a relationship dynamic there. And it seems to me that at that point there was, look, men have to go provide, but they have to sweat to provide. Before
right,
that, they didn't have to sweat to provide. Now they have to. And for women, um, seemingly reproduction was easier. Now it's harder. And there's this dynamic where you're going to have to get along with your a husband to survive, in your ideals. How would you say it? For the ideal scenario, you're going to have to get along with a husband to survive. Um, there seems to be more of that kind of dynamic where before there could be you could read into it that there was more autonomy. And it seems like since we have modernized in the world, that some of that autonomy is coming back, that women feel freed from that need to be subjected to men, these pigs who in their own right are truly pigs sometimes. So I mean, men fight and fist fight, and there's drinking and alcoholism and all kinds of ills that happen in with men, and even historically that was the case. Even back
right.
in the chivalrous time, there was still all kinds of things happening in society. So in short, are women better off now than they were then? Probably in some ways, and probably worse off in some ways. Are men better off now than they were then? In some ways maybe, in some ways probably not. It's this That's why it's this constant fight in society, because there is not an equilibrium. In one sense is wives submit to your husbands, for this is the will of God. Men love that passage. And the other one is, men give your life for your wife.
Right.
And so there isn't just one side here. In any way you look at it in a relationship stance, there's going to be give and take. If men cannot give themselves to being a husband and a father, they're in the wrong. If women cannot, submit ultimately to a man's lead in a relationship, in a marriage, um, when it's necessary, that's going to cause challenges in the marriage. It's just the way it is. Um, and I think divorce rates have gone up because people just don't have the tolerance anymore. They just don't want to put up with it. They don't want to give up. They don't want to give in. And so they just finally say, I'm done. This is not for me. And I mean, I situations that I know personally in that regard has everything to do with a servant attitude. I mean, had they just been able to come to the table and just say, all right, I will do my best to prefer you, and the other partner, I will do my best to prefer you, it would have solved a lot of those issues. And those are several instances, not just a singular one. So at the end of the day, we as individuals bear responsibility for making it work, but it's not just automatic that the patriarchy is going to make life wonderful for a woman.
No,
However, if she does submit to the husband and prefer him and serve him, he will do his utmost to provide for her and take care of her. And from that standpoint, there's definitely something to that. When a man feels like his wife appreciates what he's bringing to the table, she in return gets the attention she wants.
Right.
etc. Those are well documented studies. It's not just Matt Weaver spitting that out. There are plenty of people that make those types of statements. So it is a reciprocity in order to make a family unit work. And God's way, according to scripture, the best that we can tell, definitely borrowed from the patriarchy. However, I would say the part that probably differs from the traditional patriarchy per se was the clause where husbands, you must give your life uh, to your wife like Christ did for the church, like the Messiah did for
Right.
the church, this ultimate sacrificing. That is probably different than most patriarchal societies. If I think of like Muslim homes, often, not all, not, I shouldn't say often, but there's many cases of abuse and strongness and strength rather than giving in and being, sacrificing to make a relationship happy. I don't want to blanket as a stereotype. I'm just saying in those that mandate isn't necessarily in Islam. It is in Christianity for men
Right.
to give themselves in that sense, like the Messiah did for the church, this ultimate gift of self-sacrifice. And again, on her side, yeah, it is very frustrating in a relationship when women aren't able to ultimately submit. And sometimes it is logical. The husband is a buffoon, um, you know, but there are many times where it isn't logical and that the relationship could be bettered if she could also yield at times. So I look at it not as a black and white thing because I think relationships are challenging and the dynamic hasn't gotten better because the whole economy is now built around the productivity of a household.
Right.
In most cases, to make the American dream a reality for most people, both have to be working.
Right.
And and so you have to rely on childcare in a lot of cases to raise children. And that part has definitely changed. But part of that is because we have this insatiable desire as an economy for cheap goods and services and aren't willing to pay the price to do the right thing. Just from an economic standpoint, if you look at how much money we've borrowed as a government, how much money we spend on healthcare costs, how much we spend on the military and things of that nature, the system we've created is unsustainable. And we're finding that out. The debt just keeps increasing, 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 and increasing. And it is unsustainable. At some point, you're going to face a reckoning. Doesn't matter if you're left or right, both see the brick wall coming. They don't know how to deal with it because everyone has to win an election. So at the end of the day, you're going to fall off the cliff at some point. And then life is going to get hard again. And when life gets hard, that is where this stuff comes out. When life gets hard, I think people are going to organize more in a patriarchal fashion because it's
Yeah.
going to take the strength, the sweat, and the endurance more inherent in men to dig through it, to figure out how to, and then women will have to focus on kids. The way the Amish do it, just from a lifestyle perspective, most of them will congregate close to each other. And the family really helps out in dealing with taking care of children or miscellaneous things and there's a pitching together to support the needs of the community far more than there is in general society. There's probably a better sense of welfare in the Amish community than there is in the general state because in the Amish circles there's enough fear and shame that if you ask for help you're humbled. People are
Right.
very willing to help, but it's a very humbling thing to ask for. And so it isn't a people don't look at it as a demand or as in general, it's very much like I am not doing my part for asking for help, but I'm in a situation where I can't help myself. Like we're in a problem,
Yeah.
the
And
society will come
oftentimes
around
people
that
will
and fix
pitch
it.
in even without people asking. They see a
Right.
need
There's
and
just a
yeah.
general, well, looking over the shoulder and well-being. Like in American society, it's non-existent. The only thing we do is we walk up to the government office somewhere, Social Security, whatever, or SNAP, or we'd sign up for some kind of benefit, and then they would ask you a couple questions, and you would, walk away with your benefit. But there is no community. sense in which, hey, this is, you know, you made this, how'd you say it? The government doesn't promote, let me put it this way, like in the Amish world, the greatest fear many people had, especially in previous generations, is the term "fal." There was no lower label that you could almost attain in that circle than "fal." That just
It's still that way.
it basically means lazy and good for nothing. It's kind of a combo word. It's hard to translate, but it's kind of
Lazy and
like
rotten.
lazy, rotten, spoiled, good for nothing, aloof, all wrapped into one word.
Yep.
And that is the pressure to be productive. You know, the Amish take pride in how hard they work. They like, we work hard. You know, it's not all about profit. It's we work hard. That's the identity.
Yeah.
And the good side to that is that there's a sense of like we must work to have resources. We have to be putting effort in. If we don't put effort in, we can't expect to get anything out of it. So they embrace that. And it's not just the men, the women work hard too. They work hard making all the meals, they tend to gardens, they tend to children. Many of them live on farms, they have animals. I have Amish neighbors on different sides of me. There is lazy is not the word I would use to describe any of them. They're
Right.
all doing extremely productive things. And I don't, and none of them would feel like they're in a disadvantage for being in a more patriarchal society. You know, and I look at other
Right.
neighbors, I have another set of neighbors, they both work, they both have jobs. And, you know, the kid sits at school all day basically. And that's another way to do life. You know, they're also believers. But, you know, you look at the one system versus the other, the one is more egalitarian because they both have good jobs and you know, they get to take nice vacations and do things like that that the other neighbors can't. The Amish neighbors who almost never go on vacation, maybe once in the last 10 years. But, you know, they have each other. So I think both systems can work. The thing we have to remember, I think patriarchy in the sense of nuclear family is important and vital. Patriarchy in the sense that men must rule the world, that's a mixed bag. Just look at history. It's a mixed bag. You know, men being in charge of everything hasn't necessarily made life better. Okay. It's more the nature within men, you know, the goodwill to improve humanity. There are men definitely that move the needle because they want to create things that help humans, you know, and it's the same for women. It's no different. It's intent, but the worst in humans have also come from men who have been murderous and, you know,
Right.
awful, just awful to society, like an Adolf Hitler, who was the worst that humans could come up with. You know, I don't know that it's fair. I wouldn't say it's fair to say that there's any woman ever come to that level of evil. Um,
Right. Men have
so
more, more drive in both directions, and you can't, I don't, obviously the answer is not to rein back masculinity. It's try, you have to try to channel it in the right direction. It's the only way it'll work because if you just quantify masculinity as toxic, then you end up with the problems we have today, men just hiding out in basements, playing video games and living in their parents' basements until they're 30. And, that's not a great alternative either. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's like you said, you have problems in both directions. The question is, I guess, more or less, what is God's way and what is the big picture? And what ultimately is, the best way or the right way to do it, I guess.
the best I can ascertain for myself is it definitely takes a nuclear family and it takes both parties. Takes the man giving himself and it takes the woman submitting. And I definitely hold to the complementarian side of it. I think that's the way it works. But I
Yeah,
understand in relationships that there's more dynamics than that. You know, in the Amish world, I know guys that are just mean, you know, just cruel.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Like, you know, they're just cruel.
Yep.
And you know, so patriarchy, isn't perfect either. That's why there's been a rebellion against it. But having said that, the alternative hasn't been much better. Women now feel stressed and they have to be part of the bread earning family, or, breadwinners for the family, don't get to spend the time with the kids, don't have the quality of life. There's many women I've seen on threads be like, boy, I just wish I could be a stay-home mom. Like that would be
Right,
amazing. We can't. And things of that nature. And so I tend to think like the equilibrium comes back to the New Testament commands for husbands to give themselves and for wives to submit.
right.
Um,
I would agree with
that
that.
that's how you fix the gap.
Absolutely.
Um, which I
Sacrifice on both sides.
which
Yep.
I think which I think is the problem. It's why marriages there's a lot of divorce is because there's just people being dumb, like they don't give up for each other. And look, I get it. I've been married 17 years, and there are definitely times where you want to be stubborn. It's give and take. The only reason we've survived 17 years is because there's give and take.
Right.
There's times where I give, there's times where I don't. It's like, no, 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 not now. And whatever, we can both be stubborn. Um, but in short, there has to be a awareness um, to each other and know when to make those moves. So, yes,
Yep.
sir. Any other thoughts for you, my friend?
Oh, I think we're good.
Have I shocked you?
You have not shocked me, no.
Okay, bummer. It's kind of
Have I
goofy.
shocked you? Is a better
No,
question.
no, no, no. No, I mean it's a very good subject and it's one that's loaded because both sides are going to come out and be like um are going to have very strong comments, but I think at the end of the day, the thing that the thing that if we're honest about the situations and stuff, and even in the church world, my goodness, there's a lot of issues that can happen in relationships and marriages. So church world is not immune from the challenges that exist.
Absolutely.
And, do we have the answer? Divorce rates are less in the religious circles, but they still happen a lot. And these are people that claim to be born again and have Jesus. So it tells
Yeah,
you that it's not easy to navigate all of these things. Um, but it comes back to what Jesus said. Ultimately, Moses gave the ability to divorce because of the hardness of people's hearts. And I think it's fair to say that's still the case. There's people that struggle with hard hearts, and they really need to deal with that issue. And the other stuff helps, or that will help everything, I should say. So anyway, hopefully that is a blessing to people. Sorry we scared you with a challenging subject. Um, but no, it's a good conversation. It's a good thing to talk about, think about, and at the end of the day, I think both of us agree without question that what God's heart is for us as people for this life, at least in this age, is for families, for children, and it's one of the things it says about the work of the Spirit is that He will turn the Father's hearts towards the children. There's that softening of our hearts towards our children and wanting the best for them, and we're willing to go through a lot more because of that. And that's, I think, God's heart as a father to us, His children, is to also make us good fathers, which is what is after. And you could say, of course, good mothers as well. But he wants the family unit in the next generation's life. I think it's not a good thing that there's so much single parenting. It's not a good thing that grandparents are raising children. It's not a
right.
good thing that um, the as much adopting is having to be done. Not I understand accidents happen, things of that nature, but rejection of children is an awful thing, and
Right.
society simply to try to deal with the mass of bad things, flags and says, abortion is okay. Um, and it's awful. It's awful. I mean, America has slaughtered millions, literally
Right.
millions of people. You think about the potential, the human potential in those individuals, Had they had good homes, had they had good fathers and mothers and grandparents, what they could have brought to society. Perhaps we wouldn't have a debt problem. Perhaps we would have cured some of our incurable diseases. Perhaps we would have seen great advances that would have made life a lot better in these children. But rather than that, we have a society that doesn't value what their life could have meant to this world. And I think that's a tremendous tragedy.
Yep. Amen.
Okay. Well, until next time, God bless and have a wonderful week.